I live on the outskirts of a medium-sized town in Wyoming. The main reason I settled here was that owning a large piece of land is much more achievable than it is in most other states. My home is modest and small, but it's the perfect size for someone living alone. The events I'm about to recount took place 4 years ago, back in the spring of 2019. That particular spring was relentlessly rainy. It seemed as though the skies opened up nearly every day for an entire month. On one particular Sunday, I was off work and decided to spend the day relaxing at home. I lounged on my couch, flipping through channels and catching up on my favorite TV shows. At some point in the evening, probably around 6 or 7, I heard an unexpected knock at the door. With the rain pounding on the roof, the sound was faint, but it was just enough to catch my attention. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see a man standing there. He wasn't a delivery driver, a neighbor, or anyone I would have expected to find at my remote property. Just a stranger, soaking wet, standing at my doorstep. My house is well off the beaten path, with no neighbors for at least 5 or 6 miles, so having someone show up unannounced was immediately unsettling. I kept my voice steady and asked, "How can I help you?" The man, who looked to be in his late 20s, explained that he'd been camping in the woods nearby. According to him, he'd run into some kind of trouble and needed a place to stay for the night. His story wasn't entirely unbelievable, given my location. If he truly was in trouble, my house would have been the closest place he could turn to. Still, something about the situation didn't sit right with me. It was raining heavily, and the guy looked miserable standing there. I felt sorry for him, but I couldn't ignore the potential risks of letting a complete stranger into my home. I offered him my phone so he could call someone to pick him up or give him a ride into town, but he declined. When I told him he couldn't stay, his demeanor shifted slightly. Without saying much else, he turned and started walking back down my dirt driveway. I stood there for a moment, watching him until he disappeared into the woods. His sudden appearance and strange behavior left me uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. Before long, I was back on the couch, focusing on the TV again. A couple of hours passed, and the night had grown darker. I wasn't keeping track of the time, but it must have been well past 9 p.m. when I noticed an orange glow coming from the window that overlooked my backyard. Curious, I got up and pulled back the curtain. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw the faint flicker of a campfire burning in the woods, not far from my property. It was small, barely holding up against the rain, and seemed to be under a large tree. Next to it, I could make out the silhouette of a person. I couldn't tell if they were facing my house or staring into the forest, but the sight put me on edge. I quickly closed the curtain and decided to call the police. While the person wasn't directly threatening me, their presence so close to my house was unnerving. I figured it would take the police at least an hour to arrive, given how remote my location was, but I felt it was better to be safe than sorry. After I hung up with the dispatcher, I checked the window again. The fire was still flickering faintly, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. That's when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the gravel outside. My heart started pounding as I rushed to another window to get a better view. I caught a glimpse of him, walking toward the house with something long and unmistakable in his hands, a hunting rifle. He made his way to the front door and started banging on it, loud and forceful. This wasn't the polite knock of someone seeking help anymore, it was angry, deliberate. I hurried to the hallway closet and grabbed my handgun. My hands were shaking as I tried to steady myself, the sound of the banging growing louder with each hit. Suddenly, the noise changed. He was now using the butt of his rifle to pound against the door, and I could see the wood beginning to splinter. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. If I didn't act, this could escalate into something much worse. I positioned myself around the corner, took a deep breath, and fired a single shot toward the edge of the doorframe. The sound was deafening, echoing through the house. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything but ringing in my ears. When the noise subsided, I listened carefully. There were no footsteps, no banging, just the steady drumming of rain outside. After a few minutes of silence, I worked up the courage to look through the peephole. The porch was empty. Outside, I could see muddy footprints leading away from the house, back toward the woods. It seemed the shot had scared him off. When the police finally arrived, they searched the area around the campfire and found something chilling, a buried duffel bag that had recently been dug up. Inside were items that pointed to something far more sinister than camping gear, a burglary kit, or perhaps even a murder kit. The officers told me that whoever this man was, he had likely been planning this for some time. The thought that he had been near my house, possibly more than once, was deeply unsettling. Why he chose my home remains a mystery, and the man himself was never identified. To this day, I still live in the same house, but not a day goes by that I don't think about that night. Every sound outside, every shadow near the edge of the woods, makes me wonder if he might come back. When I was younger, during my middle and high school years, I lived with my mom in a modest house. She worked an overnight job for most of those years, which meant I was often alone at home from around 8 p.m. until 4 a.m. This particular incident happened just a few months before I graduated from high school. It started off like any other night. At around 7:30, my mom said goodbye as she left for work. I settled in to play some video games, as I usually did to pass the time. It was a school night, so I couldn't stay up too late, but I always pushed my bedtime just a little. Around 11:30, I turned off my games and got ready for bed. Even then, I spent another hour on my phone before finally drifting off to sleep. Sometime later, I was startled awake by what sounded like a door closing downstairs. Groggy, I glanced at the clock by my bed. It was 3:30 a.m. My first thought was that my mom had come home early, which sometimes happened if her shift ended sooner than expected. I rolled over, trying to go back to sleep, but then I started hearing slow, deliberate footsteps moving around downstairs. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured she was just getting something from the kitchen or tidying up before heading to bed. But the sound of those footsteps didn't stop. Normally, my mom would come straight upstairs after work to get ready for bed, but these steps were moving room to room, like someone methodically walking through the house. After a minute or two of listening, I began to feel uneasy. Something didn't feel right. The way the footsteps moved, pausing every so often, felt calculated. Slowly, it dawned on me that whoever was downstairs might not be my mom. Trying to stay calm, I got up and switched on the light in my room. The moment I did, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was unnerving. I stood by my door, straining to hear anything else, but there was nothing. Gathering some courage, I opened my door a crack and peeked into the hallway. Everything was dark, and I noticed there wasn't a single light on downstairs. My mom always turned on at least one light when she got home, so this struck me as odd and alarming. Whoever was down there hadn't turned on a light at all. I stepped carefully into the hallway, moving as quietly as I could until I reached the top of the stairs. Kneeling down, I looked through the railing into the living room below. It was hard to make out much in the darkness, but from what I could see, nothing seemed out of place. My gaming console was still sitting there, untouched. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined the whole thing. If someone had broken in, wouldn't they have taken something valuable, like the PlayStation? It made no sense. Still uneasy, I decided I needed to be sure. "Mom? Are you home?" I called out softly. No response. No sound of movement either. Determined to figure out what was going on, I slowly descended the stairs. The house felt eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes every little sound echo in your ears. When I reached the bottom, I walked cautiously into the kitchen. That's when I saw it. A single, wet shoe print on the tiled floor. My heart started racing as I looked up, and my eyes locked onto a figure sitting at the dining table. It was a man, completely still, wearing a dark mask. His clothes were all black, blending into the shadows, making it hard to make out his features. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. He just sat there, staring at me with an expression, or lack of one, that sent a wave of pure dread through me. Without thinking, I bolted back upstairs, slamming my bedroom door shut and locking it. My hands were trembling as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I whispered to the operator, explaining what was happening while trying to stay as quiet as possible. As I spoke, I heard the man's slow, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. My breathing quickened as I held the phone tightly, listening to him approach. He stopped at the bottom of the staircase, lingering there for what felt like an eternity. Then, I heard the front door open. The man's footsteps faded into the night. Not even a minute later, headlights swept across my bedroom window. My mom had just pulled into the driveway. I ran out of my room to meet her, shouting for her to stay in the car as I explained what had happened. When the police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the house and the surrounding area but found no sign of the man. However, they did conclude that the wet shoe print and the fact he hadn't stolen anything pointed to a chilling possibility: he wasn't there to rob the house. The officers believed he had been waiting for my mom, likely intending to harm her. The timing of his break-in suggested he thought she'd be home soon, but instead, he found me. The realization of how close I, or my mom, had come to danger that night is something I can never forget. To this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone downstairs to check, or if my mom had walked in just a few minutes earlier, completely unaware of the man waiting inside. That thought still haunts me. I was working my usual late shift at a small drive-through cafe. It's a tiny place with only a handful of indoor tables, as most of our business is drive-through. It's not a busy spot, especially late at night. As the lone closer, I'd often sit at a table, lost in my phone, only rising for drive-through orders. This particular night was even quieter, a light drizzle keeping customers away. For 2 solid hours, not a single soul came through. I was peacefully watching Netflix when the front door swung open. It startled me, as nobody ever enters the shop that late. A tall figure, cloaked in darkness, walked to a table and sat, oblivious to my presence. Something was off about him. He was drenched, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. How had he gotten there? No cars had pulled up. He must have walked. I approached the table cautiously, greeting him and asking what he wanted. He didn't respond, his face blank and expressionless. I repeated myself, but he cut me off, his voice low and demanding. "Who else is working?" he asked. I answered, feeling a chill run down my spine. He ordered a small coffee, and as I turned to prepare it, I saw him standing in the kitchen doorway. His bloodshot eyes were fixed on me, and his face was devoid of any emotion. "Do you need something else?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't reply. "Put the drink down and come with me," he ordered, his tone urgent. I hesitated, fear gripping me. He was much larger than me, and his intent was clear. Reluctantly, I obeyed, my heart pounding in my chest. As we left the store, he grabbed my shirt and pulled me across the parking lot towards a dark, ominous wooded area. The cold night air whipped around us, and I could feel the fear growing inside me. I tried to think of a way to escape, but he was too strong and too determined. I felt a surge of panic as I realized that I was completely at his mercy. We walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of our footsteps on the gravel path. The trees loomed overhead, their branches casting long, eerie shadows. I tried to focus on the darkness, hoping to find a way out, but it was hopeless. I was trapped. As we reached the edge of the woods, I saw a small clearing. I thought I could make a run for it, but the man was too quick. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the darkness. I struggled against him, but it was useless. He was too strong. I closed my eyes, resigned to my fate. I thought about my family, my friends, and my life. I wondered if I would ever see them again. I was scared, but I was also angry. I was angry at the man for putting me in this situation, and I was angry at myself for being so stupid. I opened my eyes and looked at the man. His face was still blank, but his eyes were filled with a cold, calculating intensity. I knew that he was going to hurt me, and I was terrified. Just as I was about to give up hope, I heard a noise in the distance. It was a car, driving down the road. The man froze, his eyes darting towards the sound. I saw my chance and I took it. I broke free from his grip and sprinted towards the road. The man chased after me, but I was too fast for him. I reached the road just as the car was passing by. I waved my arms frantically, and the car slowed down. The driver rolled down the window and I begged for help. The driver saw the man chasing me and immediately stopped the car. The man stopped when he saw the car. He knew that he had been caught. He turned and ran back into the woods. The driver got out of the car and walked over to me. He asked me if I was okay, and I nodded. I was shaking, but I was safe. The driver called the police and reported the incident. The police arrived a few minutes later and took my statement. They also searched the woods for the man, but they couldn't find him. I was lucky to have escaped. If the driver hadn't come along when he did, I don't know what would have happened to me. I was grateful to be alive and safe. I was 18, a teenager with the world at my feet. It was the start of summer, a time for freedom and fun. School was out, and I had no job to tie me down. My days were a blur of video games, YouTube binges, and lazy relaxation. My parents were out of town, a common occurrence that usually brought a sense of carefree independence. I'd invite friends over, or simply relish the solitude. This particular night, I was lost in a favorite Netflix show, scrolling through my phone. It was late, perhaps 11 or 12, when a knock shattered the quiet. Pausing the show, I approached the door, a flicker of curiosity mixed with a hint of unease. It was late, far too late for visitors. I peered through the peephole, my heart pounding. Two men, dressed alike, stood on the porch, their eyes fixed on the door. A split-second decision. Should I announce my presence, or play it cool? I chose silence, watching as they waited. Then, their voices broke the stillness. "We're here to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Ian." They were referring to my parents, though I'd changed the name for privacy. Confused. It was far too late for a visit, even an urgent one. The men exchanged a quiet conversation, then turned and walked away. No car lights, no sound of a departing vehicle. Had they walked here? I returned to the TV, leaving it paused, my senses alert. Minutes later, footsteps approached, but this time they circled the house. I rushed to the back window, watching as they entered the yard and moved towards the back door. I retreated, fear gripping me. Their voices, their fumbling with the lock, filled the air. I grabbed my phone and slipped into the garage, dialing the police. A loud pop echoed through the house, followed by the sound of the door swinging open. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, a door slammed shut. Silence. A horrifying, endless silence. What do they want? I thought to myself. Are they here to harm me? Or my parents? I heard them walking around in the house, looking for something. At a glance, I saw a man with a knife in his hand. It had a stain. It was red. Was it blood? Oh my God. What do they want? Terrified, I couldn't think. I was there just waiting. Waiting for them to find me. What would happen if they did find me? I heard one of the men enter the garage. He walked in. Looked around. Didn't find me. I was terrified. The horrific thought of them finding me. Finally, the sirens wailed, breaking the tension. Quick footsteps descended the stairs, followed by the sound of an argument. Police officers stormed the house, one emerging to guide me outside. The intruders were arrested, silent and uncooperative. Weeks passed, and the mystery remained unsolved. Were they robbers? Or something more sinister? The break-in had rattled me to the core. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for my parents, that I had narrowly escaped a fate far worse. I think about what would have happened to me. If they caught me sleeping, would have I been kidnapped? Killed? I was so scared for my life. The incident left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the fragility of safety. The late-night knock, the hushed conversation, the silent retreat, these details replayed in my mind, a haunting echo of the night's events. I don't sleep at night because I have nightmares about that night. I often pondered the what-ifs. What if I had answered the door? Would they have forced their way in regardless? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a persistent question mark hanging over the night's events. The silence of the intruders was another unsettling factor. They offered no explanation, no motive. Their silence was deafening, a void that fueled speculation and fear. Were they part of a larger operation? Were they targeting my family specifically? The unanswered questions left a lingering sense of unease. The police investigation yielded little. The intruders were charged with breaking and entering, but their ultimate motives remained a mystery. The case seemed to fade into obscurity, leaving me with more questions than answers. They only said that there was a gang that looked into empty houses at night for people to harm, or did they say kill? Other people have disappeared from robbed houses. The experience forever altered my perception of safety and security. The once familiar house now held a sinister undercurrent, a reminder of the night's intrusion. I became hyper-aware of sounds, shadows, and unfamiliar presences. The simple act of answering the door became a calculated decision, a potential gateway to danger. The incident also forced me to confront my own vulnerability. As a young, inexperienced teenager, I was ill-equipped to handle such a situation. The fear, the uncertainty, and the helplessness were overwhelming. I realized the importance of preparedness, of knowing how to react in such a situation. In the aftermath of the incident, I took steps to enhance my security. I installed a security system, reinforced the doors and windows, and became more vigilant about locking up. I also learned self-defense techniques, empowering myself with the knowledge and skills to protect myself. I was 17 and living in my parents' basement. It wasn't a trashy basement or anything. It was probably similar to what would be considered an in-law suite. My parents traveled for work all the time, so I usually wouldn't be in the basement unless I was sleeping in the bedroom down there or playing video games or whatever. This was during one of my parents' work trips. I was alone for a whole week. This night was a Saturday, so I didn't have school or really anything to do. I knew it was supposed to storm later in the day, though, so before it was too late, I took my parents' car out to the store and got some food to make. While driving back, the storm rolled in. The roads weren't busy, thankfully, because even with the windshield wipers going at the fastest setting, it was still difficult to see. I pulled into the driveway and ran to the front door, getting inside and drying off. I then went straight to the kitchen and turned on the oven so I could make dinner, but almost right away, I heard something below me. It sounded like something falling over in the basement, like maybe a box or something. My first thought was that there might be a leak down there, and I got really worried about a possible flood. So, I quickly went to the basement. I opened the door and flicked on the light, and as I walked down the steps, I didn't hear anything. No running water or any other sounds, and when I got to the bottom, everything looked okay. I walked through the main area where I had a small couch and TV set up, and then I went to the storage room. This was the only unfinished part of the basement where we just stored a bunch of boxes and stuff. I opened the door and looked in. At first, it all looked normal, and I was actually really confused at what I could have heard. All the boxes were stacked up still, and nothing was on the ground. But after a quick walk through, I noticed something really strange. One of the boxes sitting on top of the stack was open, and when I looked inside, everything was scattered all over the place. It was full of old trophies that my parents kept, and almost all of them were broken. It looked like the box had fallen and broken everything inside, and then someone quickly tossed everything back in. I felt a surge of adrenaline run through my body as I stared at the box. I realized that someone had been in the basement, and they had broken the trophies. I looked up and scanned the room, feeling a sense of dread. The loud storm outside made it difficult to hear anything, which only added to my fear. I started to back up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, one of the boxes in the back of the room was knocked onto the ground. A figure emerged from behind the box, and I could see that it was a man. He was wearing a dark hoodie and his face was obscured by the shadows. The man started running towards me, and I knew I had to get out of there. I turned and ran towards the stairs, the man's footsteps echoing behind me. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, and I was terrified that he would catch me. I stumbled up the stairs, my legs feeling heavy and weak. I reached the top of the stairs and burst out of the basement door, slamming it shut behind me. I booked it for the stairs, and I have to say, there is nothing more terrifying than hearing his footsteps climbing the stairs just a few feet behind me. The fear really got to me, and on the last step, I slammed my foot on the stairs and fell straight on the ground. Every horrible scenario just rushed through my head in that moment, but when I turned around, the guy came up to the top of the staircase and immediately ran for the front door, running out of the house. I got up and locked it behind him, then called the cops. They found an unlocked window that he climbed in through, but as far as why he came into the home, there really isn't any answer. I was getting out of work late due to a recent security issue at our company that had everyone working overtime. I would usually take the train to and from work, but since I knew I'd be out past the train's running hours, I had to drive. It was nearly an hour to get home. As I was getting out of the city, though, I saw that my gas was almost empty. I didn't remember it being this low before work, but I could have been too tired to have even noticed it. I knew there was a gas station by my house, though, so I was just going to fill it up there. But 10 minutes later, an alert came up on my dashboard that I was extremely low on fuel. It had gone down way more than it should have in such a short time, and within a minute, my car was stuttering and barely running. I pulled over, and just as I put it in park, the engine cut out. I tried to start it again, but it didn't budge. I was both worried and frustrated, like, how the hell was this even happening? I took out my flashlight from the glove compartment and got out. The issue took less than 5 seconds to find. There was gas clearly leaking. I had no idea how this could even have happened since everything was fine earlier, but before I could do much thinking, a truck pulled up behind me. Their headlights were off, and they parked unnervingly quickly, like there was no hesitation. I stood up and looked at their windshield, seeing a couple of figures moving around inside. I called out, "I'm okay, guys, don't need any help," but they ignored me. They continued to move around inside the truck, their silhouettes shifting and changing in the dim light. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched them, a sense of unease washing over me. After a few minutes, one of the doors opened, and a man emerged. He was tall and lanky, with a sinister grin that stretched across his face. He approached me, his voice low and menacing. "Need a hand?" he asked, his eyes boring into mine. I declined his offer, but he persisted, his tone growing more insistent. I felt a surge of fear as he stepped closer, invading my personal space. His breath was hot and stale, and his eyes seemed to pierce my soul. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to maintain my composure. I knew I had to get out of there, but I was trapped, my car disabled and the man blocking my escape. Desperate, I pulled out my phone and pretended to call for help. The man seemed to sense my fear and backed off slightly, but he didn't leave. He stood there, watching me, his eyes filled with a dark intensity. As I fumbled with my phone, I caught a glimpse of the truck's interior. In the back seat, I saw a figure huddled in the corner, their face obscured by the darkness. The figure was motionless, as if they were unconscious or worse. A wave of dread washed over me as I realized that something terrible had happened inside that truck. I managed to dial 911 and explain my situation to the operator. As I spoke, I glanced at the man, who was now staring at the truck with a look of concern. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was involved in whatever had happened to the person in the back seat. Just as I finished my call with the operator, the man turned and walked back to the truck. He got in and started the engine, and the truck slowly pulled away. As it passed me, I caught a glimpse of the figure in the back seat. Their eyes were wide open, filled with terror, and they were desperately trying to get my attention. I watched in horror as the truck disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I was shaken to the core, and I knew that I would never forget what I had seen. The police showed up and I told them everything. There was a bit of an investigation where they found my gas tank was stabbed purposefully by someone. Likely, what happened was the guy planned the whole thing out, following me until my car broke down and hoping to get me to accept the ride. Whether that person in the back seat was truly in danger, we don't know, because the man was never found. The police told me they had reports of people missing and last seen riding in a car like the one the man had. Oh my God, what would have happened if I had accepted the ride? Maybe I wouldn't have been here telling the story. Maybe I would be dead.